The door creaked on its rusted hinge, spilling a blade of desert sunlight into the gloom. Dust swirled in the air, thick as breath held too long. The man paused on the threshold, hat shadowing his eyes, the weight of travel hanging from his shoulders. 5 pairs of eyes glimmered in the half-dark, watching him from the corners of the room. They did not move. They did not smile. Their silence pressed against him like a hand at his throat. "You can tame all 5 of us?" one of them asked, her voice smooth as whiskey poured slow. The others waited, their faces unreadable in the dim, only the pale shapes of their dresses catching the light that cut through the cracks in the shutters. The man set his bag down, leather groaning against the floorboards. His boots scuffed the dust, stirring it into tiny storms. The cabin smelled of old wood, smoke that never quite left, and something sharper, like iron. He drew in a breath, rough from the trail, and let it out through his teeth. His eyes traveled from woman to woman, as if measuring the distance between them and him, as if calculating a battlefield. Outside, a hawk screamed overhead, the sound slicing the silence like a knife. One of the women shifted, just enough for the floorboard beneath her to groan. Another leaned forward, her hair falling in a curtain black as midnight, her gaze holding his steady. "No," he said finally, voice gravel dry. "I didn't come here for taming." The 5 exchanged glances, small flickers of movement like a deck of cards shuffled in the dark. One's lips curled into the hint of a smile. Another's hand tightened on the chair arm, as though it might break beneath her grip. From the window came the faint thunder of hooves, far off but steady, carried on the flat desert wind. The sound did not belong to wild horses. It had rhythm, order, menace. The women heard it too. Their eyes sharpened, their posture stiffened. The man's hand hovered near the brim of his hat, not yet lowering it, not yet showing respect or surrender. The woman nearest the window rose and stepped into the light. Her dress caught the sun, dust sparking like embers around her. She tilted her head toward the horizon, where the faint line of riders moved against the scorched sky. "They'll be here soon," she said, calm as a prayer, though her jaw was tight. The man turned his gaze toward the window, his shoulders hardening, the muscles in his jaw clenching as though bracing against old ghosts. The other women rose one by one, their movements silent, practiced, like shadows breaking free from the walls. The hooves drew closer, steady, unhurried, men confident in their purpose. The cabin held its breath, and in that silence, the challenge lingered still, sharp as the edge of a drawn blade. "You can tame all 5 of us?" Gun smoke drifted low across the cabin floor, curling in the lantern light like restless spirits. The window pane still rattled from the last shot fired. A horse screamed outside, then silence, broken only by the rasp of the man's breathing. He crouched by the doorframe, revolver heavy in his hand, though his knuckles whitened as if holding back the urge to use it. Shadows of the 5 women moved across the room, swift and deliberate, voices low but sharp with command. "2 down," one whispered, sliding a fresh cartridge into her rifle with practiced fingers. "But more waiting out there." The man's eyes flicked to her, steady, calculating, before shifting back to the window. Beyond the glass, the desert night stretched wide and merciless, the moon carving silver edges into the sand. Another woman knelt beside him, close enough for him to feel the heat of her skin. Her hand brushed the revolver still resting against his thigh. "Your aim," she murmured, testing. "It hasn't gone soft." He flinched as though struck, jaw tightening. For a heartbeat, he saw another night. Smoke thicker, screams sharper, uniforms falling around him like broken stalks of wheat. He forced the memory back down, pressing it into silence. "I'm not here to fight," he said, though his hand still trembled on the weapon. The women exchanged glances in the dim, an unspoken conversation flowing among them like a hidden current. The eldest looking of them, her eyes clear, hard as flint, spoke at last. "Then you're already lost. This land takes no oaths. You either fight for it, or it buries you in dust." Outside, a low whistle cut the air, followed by the crack of a branch underboot. The riders were circling, waiting, hungry for weakness. The man rose, slow and deliberate, his frame filling the narrow doorway. He shoved the revolver into its holster with a snap, as if daring himself to walk unarmed into the dark. His boots struck the porch boards like gunshots, each step loud in the silence. Behind him, one of the women hissed, "He'll get himself killed." Another answered, "Or save us all." The desert wind clawed at his coat, grit stinging his eyes. Shapes shifted in the sagebrush. Men on horseback, rifles glinting under moonlight. Their laughter rolled low, cruel, carried on the dry air. The man's hand hovered near his belt, but did not draw. His voice carried, steady as a church bell. "This ground don't belong to you." The laughter stopped. The horses stamped restless, sensing the sudden edge in the air. From a cabin doorway, 5 figures stood silhouetted, their rifles angled, their eyes never leaving him. The night held still, heavy with dust, desire, and the weight of ghosts. The land baron's boots struck the saloon floorboards like hammers on a coffin lid. His coat trailed dust, his eyes black as coal pits. Men stepped aside as he moved, their whispers dying to silence. Across the table, the 5 women sat in a row, their faces lit by lamplight, their shadows stretching long across the wall. The man stood behind them, hat low, arms folded tight against his chest. "You've held this land too long," the baron said, voice smooth as oil, heavy with threat. "You give it over now, and you walk away breathing." The eldest woman leaned forward, her chair groaning. Her hands folded, steady, her gaze sharper than any blade. "We don't sell," she said. The baron's smile never reached his eyes. He tapped a silver coin against the wood, slow and deliberate. "Then you die holding dirt." A flicker of movement. One of his men pressed closer, hand resting on his revolver. The man in the shadows shifted, his presence a weight, his silence heavy as storm clouds. His jaw worked, his teeth grinding against words he hadn't yet spoken. Another woman, the quietest of the 5, slid her hand across the table until it touched the man's. Her fingers brushed his skin, soft, deliberate, reminding him of the vow he carried like a wound. He jerked back, breath sharp, but her eyes held him fast. The baron leaned in, voice dropping low. "You've been soldiers, widows, wives. But the war's over. This valley's mine. What chance do you think you have against me?" The room tightened, the silence snapping like drawn wire. Then the man stepped forward, his shadow spilling across the table, his voice cutting through the smoke. "You know my name?" he said. The baron's coin stilled. His smirk faltered, just a breath before crawling back across his face. "I do," he murmured, "and I know the trail of bodies behind it. You think that name still buys fear?" The man's hand twitched at his side, fingers grazing the worn grip of his revolver. Ghosts stirred behind his eyes, faces of men he'd fought beside, one face darker than the rest. That face now stood among the baron's men, scarred, grinning, waiting. "You should have stayed buried," the scarred one said, his voice rough with memory. The man's jaw clenched, his body taut as wire drawn to breaking. The eldest woman rose to her feet, her voice a stone breaking water. "We don't need taming, and we don't need mercy. But we'll take a stand, with him or without him." The baron pushed away from the table, the floor groaning under his weight. His hand brushed the brim of his hat, eyes gleaming with promise. "Then you've made your choice," he said, "and I'll make mine." He turned, his men falling in behind him like wolves. The door swung wide, desert wind rushing in, carrying the scent of dust and blood to come. The bargain lay shattered, and only death waited on the horizon. The sun bled low across the horizon, sky split red and gold, the desert burning like a forge. Hoofbeats rolled through the canyon, steady as war drums, shaking dust from mesquite. The man stood in the middle of the road, boots planted, coat whipping in the hot wind. His revolver hung loose at his side, the weight of it heavy, familiar, inevitable. Behind him, 5 women stood shoulder to shoulder on the cabin porch, rifles leveled, faces hard as carved stone. The land baron rode at the front of his men, black coats snapping, eyes gleaming in the dying light. A sneer cut his face when he saw the lone figure waiting. "You come to die, legend," he called, his voice carrying like a bell. The man's hat brim dipped low, his silence sharper than any reply. His fingers brushed the revolver's grip, slow, deliberate, like the ticking hand of a clock winding toward its end. The riders fanned out, rifles drawn, horses restless under the weight of blood soon to be spilled. The air thickened, dust curling in the glow of the sun until the whole world seemed made of fire and ash. The scarred outlaw dismounted, boots crunching against gravel. His eyes met the man's, full of memory, full of betrayal. "Always knew you couldn't stay buried," he spat. "Always knew I'd see you fall." The man's jaw tightened, but his voice came calm, steady as iron. "Then step up and try." The outlaw's hand dropped fast, metal flashing in the red dusk. The man's revolver cleared leather in a blur of silver light. One shot, thunder cracking, echo crashing against canyon walls. The scarred outlaw staggered, knees buckling, falling to the dirt with eyes still wide in disbelief. The line of riders broke. Rifles roared. The women on the porch fired back, each shot crisp, merciless, driving men from their saddles. Smoke rolled across the road, choking, blinding, lit by flashes of gunfire. Through the chaos, the man strode forward, steady, deliberate, each shot he fired finding its mark. His legend walked with him, each step weighted with ghosts, each bullet sealing the tale. The Baron's horse reared, screaming, as the man's final shot split the dusk. The Baron fell, dust rising around his body, black coat spreading like spilled ink against the road. Silence followed, broken only by the wheeze of dying horses, the moan of wind through the canyon. Smoke drifted, fading into the crimson sky. The man lowered his revolver, shoulders heaving, eyes heavy with ghosts. Behind him, the 5 women stepped from the porch, rifles lowered, their faces lit by the last glow of the sun. An old voice would tell it later, in towns where the dust never settled. How one man and 5 shadows stood against an empire, and how crimson dusk turned legend into truth.